I watched my husband Marcus transfer $47,000 from our joint savings account to buy his mistress a Mercedes convertible. What he didn't know was that same morning, I'd received notification that my grandmother's trust fund had matured, making me worth $12.8 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The money he thought would leave me stranded was pocket change, compared to what I'd been hiding for 8 years of marriage. The irony was delicious. While Marcus believed he held all the financial power in our relationship, thinking his real estate business was our lifeline, I sat quietly at our kitchen table in our Westlake Hills home, sipping coffee from a mug that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had no idea the woman he was about to financially devastate came from Texas oil money that stretched back 4 generations. Marcus Crawford Walsh thought he was so clever that Tuesday morning in March. I could hear him on his phone call from the home office, his voice carrying that particular smugness he reserved for his bigger conquests. The call wasn't with a client or his business partner James Crawford at their real estate development firm. This was personal, intimate, revolving around plans for surprising someone special with a gift that would supposedly change everything. I pressed my ear closer to the wall separating our kitchen from his office, my heart pounding not from betrayal but from anticipation. After months of watching our marriage crumble while he thought I was oblivious to his affair, the moment I'd been waiting for was finally arriving. The moment when Marcus would show his true character so completely that even he couldn't deny what kind of man he really was. The conversation was with Vanessa Torres, the 28-year-old luxury car sales representative who worked at the Mercedes dealership downtown. She'd caught Marcus's attention 6 months ago when he'd gone shopping for a new vehicle for his business. What started as flirtation over leather seat options had evolved into stolen lunches, weekend conferences that didn't exist, and late-night meetings to discuss deals that never seemed to close. I knew about Vanessa because I'd hired Detective Mike Rodriguez to document every moment of their relationship. The photographs, receipts, hotel records, text message screenshots, and GPS tracking data filled 3 thick binders locked in my personal safe. Marcus thought his wife was naive, trusting, financially dependent, and completely unaware of his double life. He was wrong on every count, but I'd cultivated that image carefully. 8 years ago when we married, I'd made a conscious decision to hide my family's wealth. 3 previous relationships had taught me that men changed when they discovered my financial background. They became either intimidatingly calculating gold diggers or resentfully emasculated men who couldn't handle being with a woman who had more money than they'd ever see. Marcus had seemed different in the beginning, talking about building something together, about partnership and mutual respect. I wanted to see if that authenticity would last without the complication of my trust fund influencing his behavior. The trust fund itself was a complex creation of my grandmother's estate planning. Established when I was born, it had been designed to mature when I turned 30, with specific provisions that kept it completely separate from any marital assets. My grandmother, Elena Walsh, had been a formidable woman who'd survived the oil boom and bust cycles of Texas, watching too many family fortunes disappear through poor marriages and financial manipulation. Her trust fund structure was designed to protect her granddaughters from exactly the situation I now found myself in. Marcus never questioned why I'd been comfortable taking a lower-paying job at the local art museum instead of pursuing more lucrative career options. He never wondered how I seemed so relaxed about money, never stressed about bills, never pushed him to make more income. He assumed I was simply low maintenance, content to let him be the primary breadwinner while I pursued my passion for art, history, and museum curation. In reality, the interest from my family's various investments was enough to cover my personal expenses several times over. The morning of the Mercedes purchase, I'd received the final documentation from Robert Sterling, the trust fund manager who'd been overseeing my grandmother's legacy for decades. At 32, all restrictions had been lifted. The $12.8 million was now completely under my control, along with mineral rights to several oil properties in West Texas and a portfolio of commercial real estate investments across Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Marcus finished his phone call with Vanessa and walked into the kitchen where I sat with my coffee and the morning newspaper. His expression was that particular combination of excitement and nervousness that I'd learned to recognize as his planning face. He was about to execute what he thought was a brilliant strategy. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, pouring himself coffee and leaning against the granite countertop we'd installed last year, the countertop he believed he'd paid for, not realizing I'd quietly covered the cost through a shell account to avoid depleting our joint savings. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" I looked up from the art section, noting how his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. After 8 years of marriage, I could read his tells like a poker player. The slight tension in his shoulders, the way he was gripping his coffee mug, the forced casualness of his tone. Marcus was about to make a move that he knew would hurt me, and he was trying to minimize his own guilt by acting normal beforehand. "It is lovely," I agreed, folding the newspaper and giving him my full attention. "Do you have a busy day planned at the office? Any big deals closing?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Marcus sat down across from me at our breakfast table, the morning sunlight streaming through our windows and highlighting the expensive watch on his wrist. The watch I'd bought him for his last birthday, though he believed it came from his business profits. "Diana, we need to have a serious conversation about our finances." My heart rate quickened, but I kept my expression neutral and concerned. The performance I'd been preparing for was about to begin. Is everything all right? Is the business struggling? No, nothing like that. Crawford and Walsh is doing better than ever. We're actually about to land the biggest development contract in the company's history. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb stroking across my knuckles in what he probably thought was a comforting gesture. But that's exactly why we need to make some strategic financial moves right now. I tilted my head, playing the role of the supportive wife who trusted her husband's business acumen completely. "What kind of strategic moves?" "Well, you know how we've been building up our joint savings account? The $47,000 we've accumulated over the past 2 years? Marcus's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "I need to make a temporary withdrawal to secure this new contract. It's an investment opportunity that's going to pay massive dividends. But I need to move quickly before someone else swoops in." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired his technique. Marcus had clearly been rehearsing this conversation, probably with Vanessa's encouragement. The story about a business investment was clever because it played into my assumed ignorance about his work while positioning him as the financial visionary making bold moves for our future. "How much of a withdrawal?" I asked, letting my voice carry just the right amount of concern mixed with trust. "All of it," Marcus said, watching my face carefully for my reaction. "I know it sounds like a lot, Diana, but this deal is going to set us up for life. We're talking about a development project that could net us over $200,000 in profits within the next 6 months. But I need to show good faith to the investors, demonstrate that Crawford and Walsh has the capital to handle a project of this magnitude." I processed this information slowly, the way someone who wasn't financially sophisticated might need time to understand the implications. "So you want to empty our entire savings account for a business deal?" "Temporarily," Marcus emphasized, squeezing my hand again. "Look, I know this is scary. I know you've worked hard to help build up that savings account with your museum salary. But sometimes you have to spend money to make money. This is our chance to really build something significant, to move beyond living paycheck to paycheck and start building real wealth." The irony of that statement was almost overwhelming. While Marcus worried about moving beyond paycheck to paycheck living, I was sitting on enough money to buy his entire real estate development company outright. But I maintained my performance, nodding slowly as if considering the weight of his proposal. "What if something goes wrong?" I asked, voicing the concerns a financially dependent wife might have. What if the deal falls through? That's all the money we have saved, Marcus. That's our emergency fund, our security blanket. Nothing is going to go wrong, Marcus assured me, his confidence radiating the kind of certainty that only comes from believing your own lies. I've been in this business for 12 years, Diana. I know a good opportunity when I see one. And besides, even if somehow the deal didn't work out exactly as planned, I have other irons in the fire. The business is solid, our income is steady, and we're young enough to rebuild our savings quickly. I let a few moments of silence pass, as if wrestling with the decision. The truth was, I wanted him to take that money. I wanted him to reveal exactly who he was, to cross the line so clearly that there would be no ambiguity about his character when everything came to light. The $47,000 in our joint account meant nothing to me financially, but it represented everything about our marriage symbolically. When do you need to make this withdrawal? I asked finally. Today, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice that I wasn't fighting him on this. The investment group is meeting this afternoon, and they want to see proof of funds before they'll move forward with the contract. I nodded slowly, reaching for his hand with both of mine in a gesture that I hoped looked like supportive resignation. If you really think this is the right move for our future, then I trust you. You're the business expert in this family, Marcus. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm just a museum curator who knows about old paintings and historical artifacts. I don't understand high-level financial strategies the way you do. The smile that spread across Marcus's face was equal parts relief, triumph, and what I could only describe as predatory satisfaction. He believed he'd successfully manipulated me into giving up my financial security, and he was pleased with his own cleverness. Thank you for trusting me, Diana. I promise you won't regret this. In 6 months, we'll be looking back on this conversation as the moment our lives really began. He stood up from the table and kissed the top of my head, the gesture feeling more like a victory lap than an expression of affection. I need to get to the bank before they open this morning to initiate the transfer. Then I'll head to the office to finalize the paperwork with James and the investment group. After Marcus left, for the bank, I sat alone in our kitchen and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My husband of 8 years had just lied to my face with practiced ease, emptied our joint savings account, and planned to use that money to buy his mistress a luxury car. The man I'd shared a bed with, built a home with, and trusted with my heart, had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person my grandmother had designed her trust fund to protect me from. But instead of devastation, I felt something closer to liberation. For months, I'd been living in the uncomfortable space between knowing the truth about Marcus and Vanessa's affair and waiting for the right moment to act. The uncertainty had been exhausting. The performance of being an unknowing wife had taken its toll, and the constant question of whether I should confront him or gather more evidence had kept me awake at night. Now, Marcus had made the decision for me. By taking our money to fund his relationship with another woman, he'd crossed a line that made everything else simple. There would be no more ambiguity, no more wondering if I was overreacting or being paranoid. Marcus had shown me exactly who he was, and now I could show him exactly who I was in return. I walked to my home office, a small room that Marcus rarely entered because he assumed it contained nothing more interesting than museum research and art history books. In reality, it was where I conducted all of my personal financial business, communicating with Robert Sterling and the various investment managers who oversaw my family's portfolio. Hidden behind a false back in my filing cabinet were the 3 binders Detective Rodriguez had compiled documenting Marcus's affair, along with the financial records I'd been meticulously keeping throughout our marriage. The trust fund paperwork was still spread across my desk from the previous evening's review. $12.8 million, mineral rights, commercial real estate investments, and complete financial independence. Everything my grandmother had worked to secure for her granddaughters, designed to ensure we never had to depend on men who might betray us. I called Robert Sterling's direct line, knowing he would be in his office early as always. The Sterling Trust Management firm had been handling my family's money for over 40 years, and Robert had personally overseen my trust fund since I was a teenager. "Diana?" he answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the warm professionalism that had made him such an effective steward of our family's wealth. "I was expecting your call this morning. I assume you received the final documentation." "I did, and I've reviewed everything carefully. Robert, I think it's time to make some changes to how I handle my financial affairs. My circumstances have evolved, and I need to prepare for some significant life changes." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Robert's mind working through the implications of my statement. He'd been managing money for wealthy families long enough to recognize the tone of someone preparing for divorce proceedings. "I see," he said carefully. "What kind of changes are we discussing?" "I need to establish completely separate banking relationships, including new accounts that have no connection to my current joint finances. I also want to review the prenuptial agreement I signed before my marriage and understand exactly what protections are in place regarding my trust fund assets." "The prenuptial agreement?" Robert said, and I could hear papers rustling as he pulled my file. "Yes, that document was very carefully crafted. Your trust fund assets are completely protected, including any appreciation or additional income generated from those assets during your marriage. Your husband has no legal claim to any portion of your inheritance or trust fund, regardless of Texas community property laws." "Good," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. "What about establishing the new banking relationships?" "I can have everything set up by this afternoon," Robert assured me. "Separate checking, savings, and investment accounts at 3 different institutions, all completely isolated from your current financial arrangements. I'll also prepare a comprehensive asset statement that you can provide to legal counsel when you're ready to proceed with whatever actions you're considering." "Thank you, Robert. One more thing I need to ask about the oil and mineral rights. What kind of monthly income are we looking at from those properties?" "Currently, about $38,000 per month, though that fluctuates with market conditions. The properties are all in active production, and we've had several inquiries about potential new leases that could increase that income significantly." $38,000 per month. I did the math quickly in my head. Marcus had just stolen $47,000 from our joint account, believing it would leave me financially vulnerable. In reality, my monthly income from just the mineral rights was nearly equal to what he'd taken, and that didn't include the interest and dividends from the rest of my portfolio. After finishing my call with Robert Sterling, I spent the rest of the morning researching divorce attorneys in Austin. I wanted someone with experience handling high-net-worth divorces, someone who understood the complexities of protecting substantial assets while navigating Texas family law. Catherine Brooks came highly recommended, with a reputation for being both strategically brilliant and absolutely ruthless when necessary. I scheduled a consultation for the following week, giving myself time to gather all the documentation I would need and to let Marcus fully commit to his course of action. If he was going to buy Vanessa a Mercedes convertible with our joint savings, I wanted him to complete that transaction before I revealed the true nature of our financial situation. By noon, I received a text message from Marcus confirming that the bank transfer had been completed. His message was brief and businesslike, noting that the funds had been moved and that he would update me later about how the investment meeting had gone. No acknowledgement of the significance of what he'd just done, no recognition that he'd just emptied our shared security blanket for what I knew was actually an expensive gift for his mistress. I spent the afternoon at the museum, throwing myself into work on a new exhibition featuring Texas women artists from the early 20th century. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was curating a show about strong, independent women who had navigated challenging circumstances to create something meaningful with their lives. In many ways, I was about to join their ranks. My colleague Lisa Chen found me in the conservation lab around 3 o'clock, working on a painting restoration that required the kind of detailed, methodical attention that helped calm my mind during stressful periods. "You seem unusually focused today," Lisa observed, settling into the chair beside my workstation. "Everything okay at home?" Lisa was the only person in my life who knew about my family's financial background. We'd been friends since graduate school, and she'd been my maid of honor when I married Marcus. She'd also been the one person who'd quietly expressed reservations about my decision to hide my wealth from my husband, though she'd never pushed the issue. "Actually, I think everything is about to become very clear at home," I said, setting down my brush and turning to face her. "Marcus emptied our joint savings account this morning to make what he told me was a business investment." Lisa's expression shifted immediately, her eyebrows rising as she processed the implications of that statement. "And you know it's not actually for business?" "I know exactly what it's for, and I have documentation to prove it." "Lisa, I think it's time to stop pretending to be someone I'm not." We talked for another hour, Lisa providing the kind of supportive, practical advice that only comes from a friend who's known you long enough to understand both your strengths and your blind spots. She helped me think through the timing of my next moves, the importance of documentation, and the emotional preparation I would need for the confrontation that was inevitably coming. When I returned home that evening, Marcus was already there, sitting at our kitchen table with a bottle of wine and an expression of satisfied accomplishment. The successful businessman celebrating another victory, completely unaware that his wife was about to reshape the entire game board. "How did your investment meeting go?" I asked, maintaining my performance as the supportive, trusting wife. "Better than I could have hoped," Marcus replied, pouring me a glass of wine. "Diana, I think this deal is going to change everything for us. The investment group was impressed with our commitment, and they're confident about the returns we're going to. See?" I sat down across from him, accepting the wine and noting how relaxed he seemed. The stress and nervousness from the morning had been replaced by the kind of confidence that comes from believing you've successfully deceived someone who trusts you. "I'm so glad it worked out," I said, raising my glass in a toast. "To our future, and to taking calculated risks that pay off." We clinked glasses, and Marcus smiled at me with what I realized was probably the last genuine moment of affection I would ever see from him. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of showing Marcus exactly who Diana Walsh really was, and exactly what it cost to betray someone with 12.8 million reasons to fight back. But tonight, I would let him enjoy his victory. After all, it would be the last one he ever achieved at my expense. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp March air that made Austin feel alive with possibility. I woke before Marcus, as had become my habit over the past few months of managing my double life. While he slept peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about his successful manipulation of the previous day, I lay in bed formulating the intricate plan that would expose every lie he'd built our marriage on. Detective Mike Rodriguez had left a voicemail overnight confirming what I already suspected. Marcus hadn't gone to any investment meeting after leaving the bank. Instead, he'd driven directly to the Mercedes dealership where Vanessa Torres worked, spent 3 hours completing paperwork for a brand new convertible, and then taken her to lunch at the most expensive steakhouse in downtown Austin. The lunch had lasted until nearly 4 o'clock, after which they'd driven the new car to a hotel on the outskirts of town. The photographs Mike had captured told the complete story, Marcus beaming as he handed Vanessa the keys to her new Mercedes. Vanessa throwing her arms around his neck in the dealership parking lot, kissing him with the kind of passion that should have been reserved for his wife. The two of them checking into the Omni Barton Creek Resort using Marcus's credit card, completely careless about leaving a paper trail because he believed his wife was too naive and trusting to ever investigate his activities. I listened to Marcus's breathing, steady and untroubled, and marveled at how soundly someone could sleep after committing such a profound betrayal. He'd stolen our entire savings account to buy his mistress a luxury car, lied to my face about business investments, and spent the afternoon celebrating his deception with the woman he was cheating with. Yet he lay beside me without a care in the world, probably planning his next move in what he thought was a brilliant strategy. What Marcus didn't understand was that his theft of our joint account had activated a much larger and more sophisticated plan that I'd been developing for months. Every document was already in place, every piece of evidence cataloged and verified, every legal strategy mapped out with Catherine Brooks, the divorce attorney I'd been quietly consulting with for the past 6 weeks. The consultation with Catherine had been revelatory. She'd reviewed my grandmother's trust fund structure and confirmed what Robert Sterling had told me. My inherited wealth was completely protected from any claims Marcus might make in divorce proceedings. More importantly, Catherine had explained how Marcus's theft of our joint savings could be used as evidence of financial misconduct that would influence everything from spousal support to property division. Marcus stirred beside me, beginning to wake up, and I quickly closed my eyes and regulated my breathing to appear still asleep. I wasn't ready for another performance of marital normalcy just yet. I needed a few more minutes to prepare mentally for the next phase of my strategy. The previous evening's wine and conversation had been enlightening in ways Marcus couldn't have imagined. His relaxed state had made him careless with details about his supposed business deal. He'd mentioned specific investors who didn't exist, described contract terms that made no financial sense, and referenced meeting locations that Detective Rodriguez had already confirmed were nowhere near where Marcus had actually spent his day. More importantly, Marcus had begun talking about our future plans with a level of specificity that revealed just how little he valued our marriage. He'd mentioned wanting to travel more, suggested we should consider moving to a larger house, and even brought up the idea of starting a family, all while knowing he was actively planning to leave me for Vanessa Torres. I slipped out of bed quietly and made my way to the kitchen, where I began my morning routine of coffee and newspaper reading. But today's newspaper held a surprise that would accelerate my timeline considerably. The business section featured a prominent article about Crawford and Walsh real estate development landing a major municipal contract worth over $15 million. Marcus's company was indeed about to close the biggest deal in its history, exactly as he'd told me. But the timing meant that his financial deception was even more calculated than I'd realized. Marcus had stolen our savings not because he needed capital for a business investment, but because he wanted to buy Vanessa an expensive gift while his company was on the verge of its most profitable year ever. He hadn't taken our money out of financial necessity. He'd taken it out of pure selfishness and disrespect. When Marcus finally emerged from our bedroom, showered and dressed in one of his expensive suits, he seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood. He hummed while pouring his coffee, kissed my cheek with more affection than he'd shown in months, and actually asked about my plans for the day as if he genuinely cared about my answer. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, settling into his usual chair across from me. "You seem to be up early today. Everything all right?" I looked up from the business section, where the article about his company's success was prominently featured. "Just reading about your company's big municipal contract. Congratulations, Marcus. $15 million is incredible." For just a moment, I saw surprise flicker across his face. He clearly hadn't expected me to be reading the business news or to understand the significance of the municipal contract. It was another small reminder that Marcus consistently underestimated my intelligence and awareness. "Thank you," he said, recovering quickly. "That's actually part of what's going to make yesterday's investment so profitable. When word gets out about the municipal contract, property values in certain areas are going to skyrocket. The timing couldn't be better for the development project I invested in." Another lie, delivered with the same smooth confidence he'd perfected over months of deception. Marcus was doubling down on his fictional business investment, probably because he needed to maintain the storyline for several more weeks while he figured out how to transition from stealing my money to leaving me entirely. "That's wonderful," I said, folding the newspaper and giving him my full attention. "I have to admit, Marcus, I was nervous about emptying our savings account yesterday. But reading about your company's success makes me feel much better about taking financial risks." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was everything I needed to see. He was pleased with himself for manipulating me so successfully, proud of his ability to maintain his deception, and completely confident that he was in control of our situation. It was exactly the mindset I needed him to have for what was coming next. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly to something more serious. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about building real wealth and securing our future. Diana, I think it might be time for us to consider some bigger changes in how we handle our finances." I tilted my head, playing the role of the interested but financially unsophisticated wife. "What kind of changes?" "Well, for starters, I think we should consolidate more of our financial decision-making." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression taking on the focused intensity he used when presenting business proposals. "You've always been content to let me handle the bigger financial picture, but I think we could be more efficient if we streamlined everything through my business accounts and investment strategies." What he was describing, I realized, was a plan to gain control over what he assumed were my limited financial assets. Marcus was positioning himself to take over my museum salary, my personal savings, and anything else I might have that he didn't already know about. It was a calculated move to ensure I would be completely financially dependent on him, making it easier for him to control the terms of our eventual separation. "That sounds complicated," I said carefully. "Wouldn't it be simpler to keep our finances separate the way they are now?" "Not necessarily," Marcus replied, and I could hear the subtle pressure building in his voice. "Look, Diana, I love that you're passionate about your work at the museum, but let's be realistic about your earning potential. $35,000 a year isn't going to build the kind of life we want. If we pool everything together and let me manage our investments through the business, we could be looking at significant growth over the next few years." He was asking me to turn over control of my financial independence to the man who had just stolen our joint savings to buy his mistress, a Mercedes. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also confirmed something important about Marcus's long-term strategy. He wasn't planning to leave me immediately. He was planning to systematically gain control over every aspect of my financial life first, ensuring that when he eventually left, I would be completely dependent and powerless. "I need to think about something that's significant," I said, maintaining my facade of consideration mixed with slight uncertainty. "Consolidating our finances feels like a big step. Can I have some time to process this?" "Of course," Marcus said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I don't want you to feel pressured, Diana. This is about building our future together, making smart decisions that benefit both of us. Take all the time you need." After Marcus left for work, I sat alone in our kitchen and felt the full weight of his calculated manipulation settle over me. He hadn't just stolen our money on impulse. He'd stolen it as part of a larger strategy to gain financial control over me, while simultaneously planning his exit from our marriage. The level of premeditation was staggering, and it confirmed that every moment of our recent interactions had been performance on his part. I called Catherine Brooks and moved up our scheduled consultation to that afternoon. The conversation with Marcus had revealed new dimensions to his deception that needed to be addressed in my legal strategy. Catherine's office was located in a sleek downtown building, her reputation for handling complex divorce cases evident in every detail of her professional presentation. "Diana," Catherine said as she reviewed the notes from our previous meeting, "what you're describing sounds like financial abuse with intent to isolate. The theft of your joint savings, combined with his attempts to consolidate control over your income, establishes a clear pattern of manipulative behavior that will work strongly in your favor." I handed Catherine the photographs and documentation Detective Rodriguez had compiled, along with the bank records showing Marcus's theft and the Mercedes purchase. As she reviewed the evidence, I could see her attorney's mind working through the implications and possibilities. "This is excellent documentation," Catherine noted, spreading the photographs across her desk. "Your husband was remarkably careless about covering his tracks." The timeline from bank withdrawal to car purchase to hotel registration creates an airtight case for financial misconduct and adultery. "What I haven't told you yet," I said, taking a deep breath before revealing the information that would change everything, "is the full extent of my financial situation. Catherine, I need to show you something that's going to alter our entire strategy." I handed her the trust fund documentation Robert Sterling had provided, watching her expression shift as she processed the significance of what she was reading. $12.8 million in assets, with monthly income streams that dwarfed anything Marcus could imagine. The prenuptial agreement that protected everything, and the legal structure that made my wealth completely separate from our marital property. "Diana," Catherine said slowly, looking up from the documents with the expression of amazement mixed with professional excitement, "this changes absolutely everything. Your husband has no idea what he's dealing with, does he?" "None whatsoever," I confirmed. "Marcus thinks he married a financially dependent museum curator who relies on his real estate business for security. He has no idea that his wife has more money than his company will make in its entire lifetime." Catherine spent the next hour walking me through the legal implications of my situation. Because of my grandmother's careful estate planning, Marcus had no claim to my trust fund assets regardless of Texas community property laws. More importantly, his theft of our joint savings while I had substantial undisclosed assets actually strengthened my position in any divorce proceedings. We discussed timing, strategy, and the various ways I could choose to reveal my financial situation. Catherine recommended what she called the nuclear option, a complete exposure of both Marcus's theft and my wealth simultaneously, designed to maximize the shock value and legal advantage. "I want to document everything," I told Catherine. "Every lie, every theft, every moment of deception. When this is over, I want there to be no question about what kind of man Marcus really is." That evening, Marcus returned home later than usual, claiming he'd been working late on the municipal contract details. In reality, Detective Rodriguez had photographed him having dinner with Vanessa at a romantic restaurant on the other side of town, both of them admiring her new Mercedes in the parking lot before spending another evening at the same hotel. Marcus's lies were becoming more elaborate and frequent, his storytelling more creative as he juggled his deception of me with his relationship with Vanessa. He told me about fictional business meetings, invented client dinners, and created an entire alternative schedule that bore no resemblance to his actual activities. What was most striking about this period was how much effort Marcus was putting into maintaining his false narrative. He was researching actual business terminology to make his lies more convincing, creating fake email threads to support his stories, and even going so far as to have his business partner James provide alibis for meetings that never occurred. The level of planning and coordination required for Marcus's deception was actually impressive in its scope and detail. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was constructing an elaborate alternate reality designed to hide his betrayal while positioning himself to gain complete financial control over what he assumed was my limited economic independence. But Marcus's careful planning had a fatal flaw. He'd built his entire strategy on the assumption that his wife was exactly who she appeared to be, a trusting, financially naive, professionally limited woman who could be manipulated and controlled through traditional means. He had no idea that the woman he was deceiving had resources that made his entire real estate business look like a neighborhood lemonade stand. As the days passed, I continued my own careful documentation, while Marcus escalated his deception. Detective Rodriguez provided daily reports on Marcus and Vanessa's activities, their increasing boldness as they grew more confident that I was completely unaware of their relationship. Meanwhile, Robert Sterling and Catherine Brooks worked together to prepare what we privately referred to as the revelation package: financial statements, asset valuations, legal analyses, and strategic recommendations for the moment when I would stop pretending to be the woman Marcus thought he'd married and start being the woman my grandmother had raised me to become. The transformation was already beginning inside me. 8 years of hiding my true capabilities, financial resources, and family background had been exhausting in ways I was only beginning to understand. Playing the role of someone smaller, less capable, and more dependent than I actually was had required constantly diminishing myself to preserve Marcus's comfort and ego. But as I prepared to reveal the truth about who Diana Walsh really was, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the complete freedom to be myself without apology or limitation. Soon, Marcus would learn that stealing from me hadn't left me vulnerable and dependent. Instead, it had liberated me from the last constraints of a marriage built on his lies and my performance. The countdown had begun. Within days, Marcus Crawford, Walsh would discover that the woman he'd been systematically betraying and financially abusing was worth more money than he would ever see in his lifetime. More importantly, he would learn that underestimating Diana Walsh was the most expensive mistake he would ever make. Friday morning arrived with the kind of humid heat that made Austin's summers notorious, even though spring had barely begun. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, carefully selecting the outfit that would carry me through what I knew would be the most important day of my marriage. Not the flowing sundress Marcus preferred, which made me look younger and less assertive, but the navy blue power suit I'd purchased months ago and never had occasion to wear. The suit had been an impulse buy during a shopping trip with Lisa Chen, who'd insisted I needed clothes that reflected my actual status, rather than the diminished version of myself I'd been performing for Marcus. The jacket was perfectly tailored. The skirt hit just above the knee, and the entire ensemble conveyed exactly the kind of quiet authority that came from generational wealth and unshakable confidence. Today was the day I would stop being the woman Marcus thought he'd married, and start being the woman I actually was. Detective Rodriguez had called the night before with information that accelerated my timeline considerably. Marcus and Vanessa had been making plans that went far beyond expensive gifts and hotel rendezvous. They'd been apartment hunting in Dallas, looking at properties that cost more per month than most people's annual salaries. Vanessa had already given notice at the Mercedes dealership, and Marcus had been researching how to dissolve his business partnership with James Crawford. More significantly, Detective Rodriguez had uncovered evidence that Marcus was planning to disappear with a substantial portion of Crawford and Walsh's assets. The municipal contract that had been featured in the business section wasn't just profitable for the company, it was Marcus's exit strategy. He intended to collect his share of the contract proceeds and vanish to Dallas with Vanessa, leaving both his wife and his business partner to deal with the aftermath. The timeline Marcus was working with gave me less than 2 weeks before he would make his move. 2 weeks before he would empty whatever other accounts he could access, liquidate what assets he could touch, and disappear with Vanessa to start their new life funded by money stolen from both his wife and his business partner. But Marcus had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed that his wife would be left financially devastated and emotionally broken, unable to pursue legal action or expose his theft because she lacked the resources and sophistication to fight back. He had no idea that Diana Walsh had been planning her own exit strategy for months, with legal firepower and financial resources that would make his theft look like petty larceny. I finished my coffee and gathered the leather portfolio that contained everything I would need for today's confrontation. Bank statements, trust fund documentation, photographs of Marcus and Vanessa, hotel receipts, GPS tracking data, and a complete timeline of his deception. Catherine Brooks had helped me organize everything into a presentation that would be impossible to deny or explain away. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would meet Marcus for lunch at the Austin Club, the exclusive downtown establishment, where he'd proposed to me 8 years earlier. The location was deliberate, private enough for an intimate conversation, but public enough that Marcus would have to maintain some level of composure when his world collapsed around him. Marcus had suggested the lunch meeting himself, believing he was setting up another opportunity to manipulate me into consolidating our finances under his control. He'd mentioned wanting to discuss our future, to make some important decisions about how we would handle our money going forward. In his mind, This lunch would be the moment when he gained complete financial control over his naive, trusting wife. Instead, it would be the moment when Diana Walsh revealed exactly who she was and what it cost to betray her. I arrived at the Austin Club 15 minutes early, requesting a private corner table in the main dining room where we would have some privacy, but remain visible to other members. The maitre d' recognized me from previous visits, though he probably didn't realize that I'd been a member of the club longer than Marcus had, my membership inherited along with everything else from my grandmother's estate. The Austin Club had been my grandmother's second home during her later years, and walking through its familiar halls always made me feel connected to her strength and determination. She'd been a formidable woman who'd navigated the male-dominated world of Texas oil and cattle ranching with grace and steel, accumulating wealth and influence while never compromising her principles. Today, I would need every bit of her strength and wisdom. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking confident and relaxed in his favorite charcoal suit. He kissed my cheek as he sat down, his demeanor that of a man who believed he was in complete control of his situation. The waiter brought our usual drinks, a martini for Marcus, sparkling water with lime for me, and we made small talk about the weather and his morning meetings. "You look beautiful today," Marcus said, though I noticed his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "That's a stunning suit. I don't think I've seen it before." "Thank you," I replied, smoothing the jacket and enjoying the way the expensive fabric felt against my skin. I thought today called for something special. Marcus smiled and raised his martini in a toast to special occasions and important conversations. "Diana, I've been looking forward to this lunch all week. I think we're about to make some decisions that will change our lives forever." The irony of his statement was almost overwhelming. Marcus had no idea how prophetic his words were or how dramatically his life was about to change, but not in the way he was expecting. We ordered our meals, Marcus choosing the most expensive steak on the menu, as always, and I waited for him to begin the conversation he thought he was orchestrating. He started slowly, talking about his success with the municipal contract, the opportunities that were opening up for Crawford and Walsh, and his vision for our financial future together. "Diana," Marcus said, leaning forward with the intensity he reserved for his most important business presentations, "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about consolidating our finances and building real wealth. I want to propose something that might sound dramatic, but I think it's exactly what we need to secure our future." I nodded encouragingly, playing my role perfectly while mentally preparing for what I knew was coming next. "I think we should put everything we have into a joint investment account that I'll manage through the business," Marcus continued. "Your museum salary, your personal savings, everything combined with my income and the profits from Crawford and Walsh. Diana, with the municipal contract and the other opportunities that are developing, we could be looking at serious money within the next year." What Marcus was describing was a complete financial takeover disguised as a partnership proposal. He wanted access to every penny I had, every asset I could touch, so that when he disappeared with Vanessa, he would leave me with absolutely nothing. "That sounds like a significant commitment," I said carefully. "What would happen to my personal, financial security if something went wrong with the business?" "Nothing's going to go wrong," Marcus assured me, his confidence radiating the kind of certainty that only comes from believing your own lies. "But even if there were unexpected challenges, Diana, you have to trust me. I've been managing money and building wealth for years. This is what I do." The waiter brought our meals, and Marcus continued his pitch while cutting into his steak. He painted a picture of our future together that was compelling in its detail and completely fictional in its foundation. Trips to Europe, a larger house in Westlake Hills, maybe even a vacation home in Colorado, all funded by the financial empire he claimed to be building through his business acumen and investment expertise. What Marcus didn't know was that I could afford to buy everything he was describing with the interest income from my trust fund, without touching the principal. His grand vision of wealth accumulation was pocket change compared to what my grandmother had already secured for me. Marcus, I said when he paused in his presentation, I appreciate your confidence in our financial future, but I need to share something with you that might change your perspective on our situation. I reached into my leather portfolio and withdrew the first document, placing it on the table between us. It was a bank statement from my personal account at First National Trust and Investment, showing a balance that made Marcus's eyes widen with surprise. Diana, he said, staring at the statement, where did this money come from? This shows over $200,000 in your personal account. I had no idea you had this much saved. That's just one account, Marcus. I placed the second document on the table, then the third, watching his expression shift from surprise to confusion to something approaching alarm. These are statements from my various investment accounts, all managed through Sterling Trust Management. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the statements, his eyes scanning the numbers with growing disbelief. Diana, I don't understand. These accounts show millions of dollars. How is this possible? I waited until he'd looked through all the financial statements before placing the final document on the table. The trust fund summary prepared by Robert Sterling, complete with asset valuations, income projections, and a detailed breakdown of my grandmother's estate. Marcus, I said quietly, watching his face drain of color as he processed what he was reading. I am Elena Walsh's granddaughter. My grandmother owned Walsh Oil and Gas, along with substantial mineral rights throughout West Texas. She established a trust fund for me when I was born, designed to mature when I turned 30. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the documents, his brain clearly struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he'd married with the financial reality spread out before him. The wife he'd been systematically deceiving and financially abusing was worth more money than he would ever see in his lifetime. This is $12.8 million, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Diana, you've been sitting on $12.8 million our entire marriage? I've been protecting it, I corrected him. My grandmother designed the trust fund structure specifically to shield family wealth from potential marital complications. She'd seen too many fortunes disappear through divorce and financial manipulation. Marcus looked up from the documents, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in the conversation. Why didn't you tell me? Diana, we've been married for 8 years. Why would you hide something this significant from your husband? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of 8 years of performance finally lifting from my shoulders. Because I wanted to know who you really were, Marcus. I wanted to see if you would love and respect me without the complication of my family's money influencing your behavior. The truth was settling over Marcus like a cold fog, and I could see his mind working through the implications of what I'd revealed. His wife wasn't the financially dependent woman he'd been manipulating. She was independently wealthy beyond his comprehension, and every move he'd made based on his assumption of her vulnerability had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Marcus, I continued, reaching into my portfolio for the next set of documents. I know about Vanessa Torres. I know about the Mercedes convertible you bought her with our joint savings. I know about the apartment you've been looking at in Dallas, and I know about your plans to leave both me and James Crawford after you collect your share of the municipal contract. I placed the photographs on the table one by one. Marcus and Vanessa at the Mercedes dealership. The two of them checking into hotels, romantic dinners at expensive restaurants. The complete documentation of their affair, compiled over months of professional surveillance. Marcus's face had gone completely white, his hands shaking as he picked up the photographs. Diana, I can explain this. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I replied calmly. Marcus, you stole $47,000 from our joint account to buy your mistress a luxury car. You lied to my face about business investments while you were actually planning to abandon your wife and business partner. You've been systematically trying to gain control over my finances, while secretly planning your exit strategy. The other diners in the restaurant continued their conversations, completely unaware of the drama unfolding at our corner table. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, while his carefully constructed world collapsed around him. "How long have you known?" he asked finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "I've known about Vanessa for 6 months," I said. "I've been documenting everything, Marcus. Every lie, every theft, every moment of deception. I wanted to give you the opportunity to be honest with me, but instead, you've proven exactly what kind of man you are." Marcus tried to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wasn't finished. "Yesterday, you asked me to consolidate our finances, under your control. You wanted access to my personal accounts, my salary, everything I have. Marcus, you were asking me to hand over my financial independence to the man who had just stolen our joint savings to buy his mistress a Mercedes. The audacity is breathtaking." I reached into my portfolio one final time and withdrew the divorce papers Catherine Brooks had prepared. They were comprehensive, professionally drafted, and designed to protect every penny of my assets while ensuring Marcus received exactly what he deserved from our marriage. "Marcus," I said, placing the papers in front of him, "our marriage is over. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I've shown you exactly who I am. The difference is that I have the resources to protect myself from men like you, while you've just discovered that stealing from me was the most expensive mistake of your life." Marcus stared at the divorce papers, his hands trembling as he picked them up. "Diana, please. We can work through this. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." "No, Marcus, we can't." I stood up from the table, leaving the financial documents and photographs spread out before him. "You didn't make mistakes. You made calculated decisions to betray, steal from, and manipulate the woman who trusted you. Those weren't errors in judgment. They were choices that revealed your character." I gathered my purse and portfolio, preparing to leave Marcus alone with the wreckage of his plans. The other diners continued their meals, unaware that they'd just witnessed the complete destruction of a man's assumptions about power, control, and the women he thought he could manipulate. "Marcus," I said, looking down at him one final time, "you have 72 hours to move out of our house. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the division of our actual marital assets. As for the money you stole from our joint account, I've already reported the theft to the authorities. Detective Rodriguez has been documenting your activities for months." I walked away from the table, leaving Marcus surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal and the reality of my wealth. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Diana Walsh was finished with performances, finished with pretending to be less than she was, and finished with being married to a man who had proven himself capable of stealing from the woman who loved him. The afternoon sun was blazing as I stepped out of the Austin Club, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt completely free to be myself without apology or limitation. Marcus Crawford Walsh had just learned that underestimating me was the most expensive mistake he would ever make, and the real consequences were just beginning. The drive home from the Austin Club felt like traveling through a different world entirely. Every familiar landmark along the route seemed to carry new significance now that I'd finally revealed the truth about who Diana Walsh really was. The oak trees lining the streets of Westlake Hills appeared more vibrant, the luxury homes more welcoming. Even the Texas heat felt less oppressive. I was no longer carrying the weight of 8 years of pretense and diminished expectations. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the 20-minute drive, Marcus calling repeatedly with what I assumed were desperate attempts at damage control. I let every call go to voicemail, knowing that whatever he had to say would be some combination of apologies, excuses, and manipulation tactics designed to minimize the consequences of his choices. There would be time to deal with Marcus's reaction later. But right now, I wanted to savor the freedom of finally being authentic. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Marcus's BMW was already there. which meant he'd left the Austin Club shortly after I did and driven home at dangerous speeds. Through the front windows, I could see him pacing back and forth in our living room, his phone pressed to his ear in what appeared to be an agitated conversation. Probably calling his attorney, or maybe trying to reach Vanessa to explain why. Their carefully planned future had just exploded. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching Marcus through the window and marveling at how different he looked now that his facade had been stripped away. Gone was the confident businessman who'd been manipulating me for months. In his place was a man who'd just discovered that every assumption he'd made about power, control, and financial security had been catastrophically wrong. The house key felt different in my hand as I unlocked the front door. This wasn't our house anymore. It was my house. The mortgage had been paid off years ago through a series of anonymous payments I'd made through shell companies, though Marcus had never questioned our mysteriously low housing expenses. Like so many other aspects of our life together, he'd simply accepted the financial comfort without investigating its source. Marcus ended his phone call abruptly when he heard me enter, spinning around with an expression that mixed desperation, anger, and something that might have been genuine fear. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his normally perfect hair was disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. "Diana, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a tone of forced authority that no longer had any effect on me. "I've been thinking about what happened at lunch, and I think there are some serious misunderstandings that need to be cleared up." I set my purse and portfolio on the marble foyer table, taking my time to remove my jacket and hang it carefully in the coat closet. Everything I did was deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to Marcus's frantic energy. After 8 years of jumping to accommodate his needs and responding to his demands, I was finally operating on my own timeline. "What misunderstandings would those be, Marcus?" I asked, walking into the living room and taking a seat in the leather armchair that had always been his preferred spot for conducting serious conversations. The power dynamic shift was immediate and unmistakable. Marcus remained standing, beginning to pace again as he launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Diana, I know how the situation with Vanessa must look, but you have to understand that it's not what you think. Yes, I made some mistakes, but it's not like I was planning to leave you or anything permanent. It was just a temporary situation that got out of hand." The audacity of his explanation was breathtaking. Marcus was trying to minimize months of calculated deception and financial theft as a temporary lapse in judgment. He was still attempting to manipulate me, still believing that the right combination of words could somehow undo the evidence I'd presented at lunch. "Marcus," I said calmly, "I have photographs of you and Vanessa apartment hunting in Dallas. I have documentation of you researching how to dissolve your business partnership with James. I have evidence of you planning to liquidate assets and disappear after collecting your share of the municipal contract. This wasn't a temporary situation that got out of hand. This was a systematic plan to steal everything you could and abandon everyone who trusted you." His pacing stopped abruptly, the reality of how much I actually knew hitting him like a physical blow. "Diana, how long have you been spying on me? How long have you been planning this ambush?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected him. "Marcus, you stole $47,000 from our joint account to buy another woman a luxury car. You lied to my face about business investments while you were actually funding your affair. You've been trying to manipulate me into giving you control over my finances while secretly planning to leave me with nothing. I didn't ambush you, Marcus. I simply documented your choices and prepared for the consequences." Marcus's attorney had apparently advised him to try a different approach, because his demeanor suddenly shifted from defensive to what he probably thought was conciliatory. "Diana, look, I know I've made some serious mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I can end things with Vanessa. We can rebuild our marriage. You don't have to throw away 8 years over some bad decisions." Some bad decisions, I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air between us. Marcus, you didn't accidentally fall into bed with another woman. You didn't mistakenly steal our savings account. You didn't inadvertently plan to abandon your wife and business partner. These were deliberate, calculated choices that revealed who you really are. I stood up from the armchair and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. The perfectly manicured lawn and swimming pool that Marcus had always taken credit for maintaining. In reality, I'd been paying for landscaping and pool service through the same shell company that handled most of our household expenses. Marcus, there's something else you need to understand about our financial situation, I said, turning back to face him. The mortgage on this house was paid off 3 years ago. The cars we drive, the furniture we own, the art on these walls, the vacations we've taken, all of it was funded by my family's money, channeled through various holding companies to maintain the fiction that you were the primary breadwinner. The color drained from Marcus's face as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. For years, he'd been living in a house I owned, driving cars I'd paid for, enjoying a lifestyle I'd funded, all while believing he was the successful businessman supporting his financially dependent wife. That's impossible, Marcus whispered. I've been paying the mortgage. I've been covering our expenses. Diana, I've supported you throughout our entire marriage. No, Marcus, you haven't. I walked to the bar cart in the corner of our living room and poured myself a glass of water, taking my time while he stood frozen in the middle of the room. You've been paying for groceries and utilities and your personal expenses. Everything else, everything significant, has been covered by my trust fund income. You've been living in a world I created and funded while believing you were in control. The phone in Marcus's pocket began buzzing again, and he pulled it out with trembling hands. The caller ID displayed Vanessa's name, and I could see him debating whether to answer in front of me or let it go to voicemail. Go ahead and take it, I said. I'm sure she's wondering why her luxury car payments might be in jeopardy. Marcus stared at the phone until it stopped ringing, then looked up at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. Diana, I don't understand any of this. If you've had this much money all along, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe I was supporting us? Because I wanted to know who you really were, I replied. Marcus, I'd been in 3 previous relationships where men changed completely once they learned about my family's wealth. They either became calculating and mercenary, or they became resentful and emasculated. I wanted to see if you were different. And clearly, you're not different. You're exactly the kind of man my grandmother designed her trust fund to protect me from. A man who would steal from his wife, lie to her face, and plan to abandon her while believing she was financially helpless. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced at it automatically. Based on his expression, Vanessa was becoming increasingly concerned about his absence and demanding explanations. The woman who'd been enjoying his stolen money was probably starting to suspect that her luxury lifestyle might be in danger. Marcus, I said, walking back to my purse and retrieving the divorce papers Catherine Brooks had prepared. I need you to understand something very clearly. This marriage is over. Not because I'm angry or hurt, though I am both of those things. It's over because you've shown me exactly what you're capable of when you think you have power over someone you consider vulnerable. I handed him the divorce papers, watching as he flipped through them with growing alarm. The settlement Catherine had structured was legally airtight and financially devastating for Marcus. Because of his financial misconduct and adultery, he would receive the absolute minimum allowed under Texas law. No alimony, no claim to my trust fund assets, and only a fractional share of our actual marital property. Diana, this is insane, Marcus said, his voice rising with panic. You can't just throw away our marriage because of some mistakes I made. We can fix this. I'll end things with Vanessa right now. I'll pay back the money I took from our account. We can start over. The money you stole from our joint account is the least of your problems, Marcus. I retrieved another document from my purse, the police report I'd filed that morning documenting the theft. Detective Rodriguez has been building a case against you for months. The theft of our savings is just one piece of a much larger pattern of financial fraud. Marcus stared at the police report, his hands shaking as he realized the full scope of what he was facing. Diana, you're talking about criminal charges. This could ruin my career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. You ruined your career and reputation when you decided to steal from your wife to fund your affair, I replied. The criminal charges are just the consequence of choices you made. Choices that revealed who you really are when you think nobody is watching. His phone rang. Again, Vanessa's name flashing on the screen with increasing urgency. This time, Marcus answered it, his voice strained and desperate as he tried to explain why he couldn't meet her for their planned evening together. I can't tonight, Vanessa, he said, turning away from me as if that would provide privacy. Something's come up at home. Family emergency. No, I can't explain right now. I'll call you later. The conversation was brief and obviously unsatisfying for Vanessa, who was clearly demanding more information than Marcus was prepared to provide. When he hung up, he looked at me with an expression of complete defeat. She doesn't know, does she? I asked. Vanessa has no idea that the man buying her expensive gifts and promising her a luxurious future in Dallas is actually financially dependent on the wife he's been betraying. Marcus slumped onto the couch, his head in his hands, the weight of his situation finally settling over him completely. Diana, what do you want from me? What will it take to make this go away? This isn't going away, Marcus. I sat down across from him, maintaining the calm authority that had replaced years of performance and accommodation. You made choices that have consequences. Legal consequences, financial consequences, and personal consequences that can't be undone by apologies or promises to change. I leaned forward, making sure he was looking directly at me. Marcus, you have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from this house. After that, the locks will be changed and you'll be considered trespassing if you return without permission. Your access to all joint accounts has been frozen, and your attorney will receive a complete accounting of our marital assets within the week. But Diana, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Marcus's voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before, the sound of a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed entirely. I suggest you contact Vanessa, I replied. After all, you've invested considerable time and stolen money into building a relationship with her. Perhaps she'll be understanding about your change in financial circumstances. Marcus looked up at me with something approaching horror. You can't be serious. You're going to destroy my life over this? I'm not destroying anything, Marcus. I'm simply removing the subsidies that allowed you to live beyond your actual means, while you betrayed the woman providing them. You'll still have your share of Crawford and Walsh, assuming James doesn't discover your plans to abandon the partnership. You'll still have your professional skills and your ability to earn a living. You just won't have access to my family's money anymore. The reality of his situation was beginning to penetrate Marcus's shock and denial. Without access to my trust, fund income, without the house I'd been paying for, without the lifestyle I'd been subsidizing, his actual financial position was far more precarious than he'd realized. Marcus, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt, I want you to understand something very important. This isn't about revenge or punishment. This is about consequences. You made a series of calculated decisions to betray, steal from, and manipulate the woman who loved you. Now you get to live with the results of those choices. I walked toward the staircase, preparing to go to my office and begin the next phase of reclaiming my authentic life. Behind me, Marcus sat on the couch surrounded by divorce papers and police reports, finally understanding that Diana Walsh was not the woman he'd thought he married. The afternoon sun streamed through our living room windows, illuminating the space that would soon be mine alone. For the first time in 8 years, I felt completely free to be myself without apology, limitation, or pretense. Marcus Crawford, Walsh had just learned the most expensive lesson of his life, and the real consequences were only beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated master bedroom of what was now officially my house, watching the Austin sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and coral. The room bore no resemblance to the space I'd shared with Marcus. Gone were the heavy, masculine furnishings he'd preferred, replaced with pieces that reflected my actual taste, rather than the accommodating wife I'd pretended to be for 8 years. The transformation of the house mirrored the transformation of my life. Robert Sterling had helped me establish Diana Walsh as a legitimate public figure in Austin's philanthropic and business communities, no longer hiding behind shell companies and anonymous donations. My grandmother's trust fund was now being used openly and strategically, funding scholarships for young women studying business and finance, supporting domestic violence prevention programs, and investing in female-owned businesses throughout Texas. The doorbell chimed downstairs, and I smiled, knowing it was Lisa Chen arriving for our weekly coffee meetings that had become a cherished ritual. Lisa had been instrumental in helping me navigate the emotional complexity of reclaiming my identity after years of performance and pretense. She'd also been a witness to Marcus's complete unraveling over the past 6 months. "Good morning, Lisa," called out as she entered through the front door I'd left unlocked for her. The security system had been completely upgraded after Marcus moved out, though he'd never posed any physical threat. The enhanced security was more about establishing clear boundaries and ensuring my privacy in my new life. I made my way downstairs, to find Lisa in the kitchen, already starting coffee with the familiarity of someone who'd helped me through the most challenging transition of my adult life. She looked radiant in her summer dress, her own life flourishing as she'd recently been promoted to senior curator at the museum where we both worked. "Have you seen the business journal this morning?" Lisa asked, sliding a newspaper across the marble countertop. "There's an interesting article about Crawford and Walsh real estate development that I thought you should see." I scanned the article with growing satisfaction. James Crawford had discovered Marcus's planned betrayal of their partnership shortly after my divorce proceedings became public. The subsequent investigation had revealed that Marcus had been systematically stealing from the company for months, diverting funds that should have gone toward business development into personal accounts he'd planned to access during his escape to Dallas with Vanessa. James had pressed criminal charges, and Marcus was now facing federal prosecution for embezzlement and wire fraud. The municipal contract that was supposed to be his golden parachute had instead become evidence in a criminal case that would likely result in several years of prison time. "How is he handling all of this?" Lisa asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned about Marcus's well-being. "Not well," I replied, pouring coffee into 2 mugs and settling into the breakfast nook that had been completely redesigned after Marcus's departure. "Detective Rodriguez keeps me updated on the legal proceedings. Marcus tried to flee to Mexico last month, but he was arrested at the airport. Apparently, Vanessa had already emptied what remained of his personal accounts and disappeared." The brio relationship between Marcus and Vanessa had imploded spectacularly once she realized that his promises of wealth and luxury had been funded by stolen money from both his wife and business partner. The Mercedes convertible had been repossessed when Marcus could no longer make payments, and Vanessa had quickly moved on to more financially stable prospects. Lisa shook her head with a mixture of amazement and disgust. The man really thought he could steal millions of dollars and just disappear to start a new life. The arrogance is incredible. The most remarkable aspect of Marcus's downfall wasn't the criminal charges or financial ruin, though both were significant. It was watching someone who'd built his identity around controlling and manipulating others discover that his power had always been an illusion. Marcus had never been the successful businessman he'd portrayed himself as. He'd been a moderately competent real estate agent who'd married into wealth without realizing it. "Catherine Brooks called yesterday with an update on the divorce settlement," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. "The final paperwork has been processed, and Marcus's claim to any portion of my assets has been definitively rejected by the court. The prenuptial agreement held up perfectly, just as my grandmother intended. And your trust fund remains completely protected? Completely, I confirmed. More than that, the publicity around the case has actually been beneficial for my public profile. The business community has embraced Diana Walsh as someone who represents both old Texas money and modern financial sophistication. I've been invited to join 3 different corporate boards this month alone. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's attempt to destroy my financial security had actually elevated my status in Austin's business and social circles. His betrayal had forced me to step out of the shadows and claim my place as Elena Walsh's granddaughter, bringing recognition and opportunities I'd never sought while hiding behind my modest museum curator persona. My phone buzzed with a text message from Robert Sterling, updating me on the latest developments in my investment portfolio. The trust fund had grown by over $2 million in the 6 months since I'd stopped hiding my wealth, benefiting from strategic investments and business opportunities that required active management rather than passive concealment. Speaking of business opportunities, Lisa said, pulling out her tablet to show me something she'd been researching. I've been thinking about your idea for the Women's Entrepreneurship Foundation. I found some interesting models from other cities that might work well here in Austin. We spent the next hour discussing plans for the foundation that would use my grandmother's wealth to support female business owners throughout Texas. It would be my most visible philanthropic project, requiring me to take a public leadership role that would have been impossible while I was maintaining the fiction of being Marcus's financially dependent wife. The foundation represented everything my grandmother had hoped her trust fund would achieve. Rather than simply preserving wealth for future generations, it would actively work to create opportunities for women who faced the same challenges Elena Walsh had navigated in the male-dominated world of Texas business. Lisa, I said, as we reviewed the foundation plans. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been honest with Marcus from the beginning. If I'd told him about my family's money when we first got married. You mean wonder if he would have turned out to be a different person? Lisa's expression was skeptical. Diana, men like Marcus don't change based on circumstances. They reveal who they really are when they think they have power over someone vulnerable. If you'd told him about your wealth, he probably would have tried to manipulate and control you in different ways. The insight was probably accurate. Marcus's fundamental character wouldn't have been different regardless of what he'd known about my financial situation. He'd demonstrated a willingness to lie, steal, and betray when he thought it served his interests. Those weren't personality traits that emerged because of specific circumstances. They were core aspects of who he was as a person. My phone rang with a call from Catherine Brooks, who'd become not just my attorney but a trusted advisor on navigating my new public profile as a wealthy businesswoman. Diana, Catherine said when I answered, I have some news about Marcus that you should know. His criminal trial has been moved up to next month, and the prosecutor is expecting a plea agreement. He's looking at significant prison time regardless of how he proceeds. How significant? I asked, though I realized I felt no satisfaction at the prospect of Marcus's imprisonment. His downfall had been the natural consequence of his choices, but watching someone's life collapse completely wasn't as gratifying as I'd expected it to be. Probably 5 to 7 years if he pleads guilty, potentially longer if he tries to fight the charges and loses. Catherine paused before continuing. Diana, there's something else. Marcus's attorney has been asking about the possibility of you providing a character reference or victim impact statement that might influence his sentencing. I considered the request carefully. Marcus had stolen from me, lied to me, and planned to abandon me while believing I was financially helpless. But he'd also been my husband for 8 years, and there had been genuine moments of happiness before his true nature emerged. I'll think about it, I told Catherine. Let me talk to Detective Rodriguez and see what kind of statement might be appropriate. After ending the call, I sat quietly in my kitchen, reflecting on how completely my life had transformed since that Friday morning when I'd confronted Marcus at the Austin Club. The woman who'd been hiding her wealth and diminishing her capabilities was gone, replaced by someone who owned her power and used it purposefully. Lisa was reviewing the foundation documents when she looked up at me with a curious expression. "Do you ever regret it? The years of pretending to be someone smaller than you actually were?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. Part of me regrets the lost time, the opportunities I didn't pursue because I was maintaining a fiction. But those 8 years taught me things about myself that I couldn't have learned any other way. I learned that I'm stronger than I realized, more patient than I thought possible, and capable of strategic thinking that even impressed my grandmother's attorneys. More importantly, I learned the difference between authentic relationships and performance-based ones. The friends and colleagues who knew me as Marcus's wife were connected to a character I was playing. The people in my life now know Diana Walsh, as she actually is, and those relationships are deeper and more meaningful. The afternoon passed quickly as Lisa and I finalized plans for the foundation launch event, scheduled for the following month at the Austin Club. The location was deliberate, transforming the site of Marcus's humiliation into a celebration of women's financial empowerment and entrepreneurship. As evening approached, I walked Lisa to her car and stood in my driveway looking at the house that was now completely mine. The mortgage had been officially transferred to my name, the deed updated to reflect my sole ownership, and every trace of Marcus's presence erased from the property records. The house itself felt different now that it reflected my authentic taste rather than our compromised marital style. The art on the walls was from my personal collection, accumulated over years of quiet purchases that Marcus had never paid attention to. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, chosen for my preferences rather than his need to project success and masculinity. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from James Crawford, Marcus's former business partner. We'd spoken briefly during the divorce proceedings, but he'd largely avoided contact while dealing with the criminal investigation of Marcus's theft from their company. "Diana," James said when I answered, "I wanted to call and apologize for not reaching out sooner. I've been dealing with the legal mess Marcus created, but I should have checked on you months ago. Thank you for calling, James. I know this has been complicated for everyone involved. I also wanted to tell you that I had no idea about Marcus's financial situation or his relationship with Vanessa. If I'd known what he was planning, I would have warned you immediately." James's voice carried genuine regret and concern. "I believe you, James. Marcus was very good at compartmentalizing his deceptions and keeping different parts of his life separate." There was a pause before James continued. "Diana, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to ask if you might be interested in discussing some business opportunities. Crawford Real Estate is rebuilding after Marcus's departure, and I've been looking for investors who understand both the local market and ethical business practices." The conversation that followed was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. James was intelligent, principled, and genuinely remorseful about his partnership with Marcus. More importantly, he treated me as a serious business partner rather than someone's wife who'd unexpectedly inherited money. We scheduled a meeting for the following week to discuss potential investment opportunities, and I realized that my emergence as a public figure in Austin's business community was creating possibilities I'd never considered while hiding behind my museum curator identity. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the complete transformation of my circumstances over the past 6 months. Marcus was facing criminal prosecution and financial ruin, consequences that flowed directly from his decisions to steal from both his wife and business partner. Vanessa had disappeared with whatever money she could extract from him before his schemes collapsed. Meanwhile, Diana Walsh had emerged as a prominent figure in Austin's philanthropic and business communities, using her grandmother's wealth openly and strategically for the first time in her adult life. The trust fund that had been designed to protect me from men like Marcus was now being used to protect other women from similar exploitation and manipulation. I stood at my bedroom window looking out over the city skyline, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build something meaningful with the resources my grandmother had preserved for me. The foundation would launch within months, providing capital and support for female entrepreneurs throughout Texas. My investment portfolio was generating returns that could fund scholarships, business development programs, and domestic violence prevention initiatives for years to come. Marcus Crawford Walsh had stolen $47,000 from our joint account, believing it would leave me vulnerable and dependent. Instead, his theft had liberated me from the last constraints of a marriage built on his lies and my performance, revealing a woman worth $12.8 million who was finally ready to use her power without apology or limitation. The lesson my grandmother had tried to teach me through her trust fund structure was now completely clear. Wealth wasn't just about financial security. It was about the freedom to be authentic, the power to protect yourself from exploitation, and the responsibility to use resources purposefully for positive change. As I drifted off to sleep in my beautiful home that was finally, completely mine, I smiled thinking about the foundation launch, the business opportunities with James Crawford, and the life I was building as the woman Elena Walsh had raised me to become. Marcus had taught me what betrayal looked like, but he'd also taught me what strength looked like when it was finally allowed to emerge from the shadows. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.